I could really like take this diagnosis as fear, right? Like, oh, you have PCOS, you're never going to get pregnant. That's usually like how the diagnosis goes. It's never like this uplifting, like, oh, you have so much control over your body and you can be empowered, like go on empowered and work to balance your hormones. It's never like that. It's always like, oh, this is your fate and, good luck. And what I'm finding is I've had so many women who approach PCOS from a metabolic or a stress perspective, recognizing that when we have a metabolic condition like PCOS, our metabolism has already gotten to a point where it's absolutely dysregulated. If you're getting to a point of a diagnosis, that means there has been metabolic dysregulation for a very, very long time, snowballing out of control. And so the only way to kind of get rid of it is to slowly roll that snowball back.
Welcome to The Body Never Lies. I'm your host, Leela Lutz. Each week, myself and experts from around the world help you uncover the secret ways your body communicates with you to empower you in your own individual health journey. Getting diagnosed with PCOS and or endometriosis can feel like a life sentence for some. Now, I've seen two kind of camps. One where women have been having issues with their cycle or periods and getting diagnosed and then feeling like it was a really deflating, non-solution kind of answer. And then others who have debilitating, painful, life-pausing symptoms with either conditions, and they're repetitively having surgery or trying lots of different medications, diets, all kinds of things, and it really is taking over their whole life. Now, there are lots of bandaid approaches like the pill and lots of dietary recommendations like quitting sugar, dairy, gluten, etc. And I say bandaid because as soon as you take off the said bandaid, the wound opens up again. But what is the cause of these hormonal issues and how do we really overcome them so we can have beautiful, healthy reproductive systems and hormones? Jessica Ash is a clinical nutritionist, functional diagnostic nutritionist, and holistic health coach, and her course Fully Nourished has helped thousands of women overcome hormonal issues like PCOS, endometriosis, rebalance their hormones after coming off birth control, as well as solve underlying thyroid and hormonal issues, all with food. So I really hope you enjoy this episode with Jessica Ash on the myths of PCOS and endometriosis. Jessica Ash, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on The Body Never Lies.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now I see you online, you have such an experience with helping women with their hormones. So I just had to have you on the show today to talk about two specific hormonal issues that I feel like a lot of women are getting diagnosed with. And they're PCOS and endometriosis. And, we've had Tomo come on the show and talk about testing and how it can be quite limited in coming back with solutions and diagnosing what's actually wrong with you. And so I would love to talk about what is the message from the body when we have something like PCOS and endometriosis and how we're going to get to the root cause of the issue and some ideas from your experience with working with these kind of clients, how we're going to find a health and lifestyle plan. I don't like to say treat the disease. I like to say a health and lifestyle plan to get balance in the body so we don't have the symptoms of PCOS and endometriosis anymore. Could you let's start with PCOS and start maybe explaining to our listeners what PCOS actually is, or in your experience, what it is?
Yeah. And I think like with these diagnoses, they're being thrown around very much right now, and it's a wide range of, from certain doctors not even acknowledging that they exist or recognizing that they exist to doctors, anytime somebody has one or two symptoms that would possibly fit into this PCOS category or endometriosis category, they're just slapping a diagnosis and usually approaching the only treatment that they know, or, their treatment for it, which is oftentimes birth control pills. At least for PCOS, it's often synthetic birth control, pills, metformin, sometimes a diabetic medication. And then, they kind of, I've had so many clients that are just told like, oh, and then when you're ready to get pregnant, we'll just have to go forward with fertility treatments. And that's literally like kind of this like almost factory kind of diagnosis and treatment.
And then you go HRT, right? When you go through menopause, you go back on the pill when you finish having babies, and then you go on HRT for menopause, and that's your life.
And sometimes like, oh, you need to lose some weight is thrown in there as well. And so that is really frustrating to see, but also for these women that are, this issue is now increasing in numbers over the past 50 years. I couldn't find people really talking about it more than 100 years ago. And then within like the past, really, I would say 50 years, but even like 20 years, it's just exploded. And sometimes I think a lot of people are saying like, oh, it's just because now they're more knowledgeable and now they know it exists. And before, people with fertility problems just didn't, they didn't have a name for it. But I think it's more than that. And there are a lot of lifestyle factors. And then I don't like to say genetic factors because I think people feel that that's like hopeless. Like I just got past this from my mom and there's no hope. I want to almost say imprinting factors, meaning minerals get passed from mom to baby, from mom to baby. Mm-hmm. And if we have a grandmother that's mineral deficient or nutrient deficient, when she goes and creates a baby, she's not, she doesn't magically come up with vitamin A or magnesium. And so her body's going to pull from all her resources and give as much to the baby as possible. But that deficiency gets passed down. And then if that mother never, or that child never deals with their deficiency, then that child will eventually become a mother. And then that deficiency gets passed down. And so here we're dealing with really the third generation since birth control came on the market. And we know that birth control depletes a lot of nutrients, right? And so, our grandmothers were the first ones taking the pill. And then they were told like, oh, you can go off of it and just like conceive and have a baby. Mothers were told that. And here we are, the third generation of what I like to call birth control babies, where a lot of our mothers were on the pill being depleted of nutrients and not even told like, hey, you need to replenish nutrients, you need to replenish your gut microbiome, you need to create balance in the body after you've been suppressing your cycle for so long. And so here we are. And so I kind of perceive this as we're now in this generation where I really don't know one woman, except for maybe the women that we work with or that I work with, that has balanced hormones. Most women that I know have some type of hormonal issues or some type of mood issues or are pursuing some type of health issue. And that tells me that we are all in multiple states of imbalance. And maybe one person is a little bit more imbalanced than the other, leading to a diagnosis of PCOS or endometriosis. But this is really the body expressing imbalances in symptoms. It's how the body talks to us.
The body never lies. And it's so different, right, for different women, because you could have someone with the same condition, but their body expresses the expression of that dysfunction or imbalance is completely different from person to person. Like some people have thyroid disease and they put on heaps of weight, and some people have thyroid disease and they lose heaps of weight. And, it's a very different expression. And so just because you don't have the same symptoms as your friend who has PCOS or endometriosis doesn't mean that you have a different form necessarily, right? It's like your body's expression.
Exactly. And, PCOS, even the name in and of itself is confusing, polycystic ovarian syndrome, because it really, like, a lot of women think, oh my gosh, there's cysts, growing on my ovaries. But ovarian cysts are actually different than polycystic ovarian syndrome. Polycystic ovarian syndrome got its name because when your body is getting ready to ovulate, the follicles are actually racing toward ovulation. So you have like 5 to 10 follicles oftentimes kind of working towards ovulation, and then one is going to actually win and become the follicle that actually gets to drop the egg and release the egg in ovulation. And so when you look at this on an ultrasound, it looks another word for follicles in the medical language is cysts. And so when they would do an ultrasound and look at the ovaries and look at the body working towards ovulation, they would see that the follicles had a cystic appearance because they hadn't made it towards ovulation yet. And so they decided to call it polycystic ovarian syndrome, or many cysts on your ovary syndrome.
Yeah. And
that was their name for it. But it really, there are a lot of women with PCOS or the markers of PCOS that don't even have polycystic ovaries, don't have ovarian cysts. And it really is a metabolic condition that's spilling over to eventually affect the reproductive system, which of course the metabolism affects the reproductive system.
100%, right? And I find it really interesting when women tell me that they have PCOS. Mm-hmm. And ask them, well, what was your diagnosis?
Yeah.
Like, can you talk a little bit about the diagnosis, like how it's being diagnosed? And
yeah. So there are different or doctors can go by different diagnosis patterns, or they kind of have different diagnosis criteria. So there are multiple ways to diagnose, but usually you need 2 out of the 3 symptoms to qualify you. So I believe that is, and I could be wrong, but I believe it's either you have anovulatory cycles, meaning like irregular periods, and or polycystic ovaries. So that's one diagnostic criteria. You also need either a high testosterone on a test or symptoms of high testosterone, which would be like hair growth, acne, hair loss, very common symptoms with PCOS. And then I believe now they're using some other metabolic markers like high cholesterol, possibly, what's the other one? They're looking at cholesterol, but they're looking at symptoms of metabolic syndrome. But I don't know if they've added that to the diagnostic criteria. From what I've seen, because I've worked with hundreds of women who have PCOS, it's like if they have irregular periods, or they're having fertility problems, or they have polycystic ovaries, and they have any symptoms of like hyperinsulinemia or high testosterone, they're just going to get diagnosed. Oftentimes I see doctors just slapping a diagnosis, even if there's just irregular periods. So I really kind of think that the diagnostic criteria right now with PCOS is kind of a mess. It's kind of chaos. I don't feel like I feel like doctors, like now that women are just having hormonal problems, they're just like, oh, you have PCOS. Or like if women have really heavy periods, it's like, oh, you have endometriosis. And so this is where like it really is kind of the wild, wild west, where we need to take a step back and say, okay, so my body is imbalanced, and I could really like take this diagnosis as fear, right? Like, oh, you have PCOS, you're never going to get pregnant. That's usually like how the diagnosis goes. It's never like this uplifting, like, oh, you have so much control over your body and you can be empowered, like go on empowered and work to balance your hormones. It's never like that. It's always like, oh, this is your fate, and good luck. And what I'm finding is I've had so many women who approach PCOS from a metabolic or a stress perspective, recognizing that when we have a metabolic condition like PCOS, our metabolism has already gotten to a point where it's absolutely dysregulated. If you're getting to a point of a diagnosis, that means there has been metabolic dysregulation for a very, very long time, snowballing out of control. And so the only way to kind of get rid of it is to slowly roll that snowball back. And it takes a lot of time, and it takes focusing on the right things. And unfortunately, women are just being told, and it's partially by experts and then partially by their doctors, you're just being confused to focus on the wrong things, right? Just lose weight and focus on your symptoms. But when you just focus on suppressing your symptoms and you do whatever you can to lose weight, and your body's trying to hang on to that weight for dear life, the problem is you're fighting against your body, and you're often making your metabolic issues worse because they're all the stress system.
I know and I feel for women as well, because sometimes women come to me and go, well, I have PCOS because I'm overweight. So then they blame themselves and then put themselves on these 1,200 calorie diets.
Yeah.
And have this, I really, the thing that annoys me about this is the discord, the shame and the hate that it causes women to feel about their body. It's really heartbreaking. I did something wrong, and so I need to punish myself with this diet to lose weight so I don't have PCOS anymore. Or, for me, I've had a lot of women who've come off the pill, for instance, and had it straight after coming off the pill. And then the solution for them is, well, you should just really go back on the pill until you want to have a baby. Because, so, and interestingly, I had a client who came off the pill. She was diagnosed with PCOS after coming off the pill, and then she went through fertility treatment to have her first child. She had gestational diabetes, so many problems like that in her pregnancy, and then post-pregnancy had hypothyroidism. And so she came to me for the hypothyroidism, and then for me it was to explain to her, well, this has been going on for a really long time. The hypothyroidism isn't because of your pregnancy. But interestingly enough, when we worked with her metabolism, I said to her, be careful to use protection when we're doing this.
Yes.
So she's like, oh no, I can't get pregnant by myself. I need IVF. Anyway, through our process, she kind of accidentally got pregnant.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't even know when that happens.
I know, right? And then it was working with her endocrinologist about this gestational diabetes and her understanding why she had gestational diabetes, which is a whole other thing altogether that I think Lauren's going to come on and talk about. But I'd love to know what you think about this coming off birth control and why so many women have it after birth control.
Yeah, so I have kind of pinpointed the stress cascade of PCOS. And of course, there are caveats to this. This isn't everyone's journey, but I do believe that the adrenals play a very large role, as do nutrients. And then polyunsaturated fats and iron, specifically like iron metabolism, all play a very large role in kind of this progression towards polycystic ovarian syndrome and just overall having a damaged metabolism. And I think a lot of times, sometimes women are actually being born in this state because mom had it and then passed it on or imprinted this on to child. So, understanding that if, PCOS is beginning or hormonal imbalances are beginning with stress, and stress just meaning the body not having the raw materials or the recovery needed to face the stressors that we just face every day, or just the repair of our body, like the repair and the renewal and the regeneration that our body needs to undertake every day. If we're not getting enough energy or nutrients to meet those needs, then that is perceived as stress, not to mention all the added stressors that can come from structural issues or emotional trauma. That just further increases our need for nutrients and energy. That's all. Like, if we want to really simplify it, it's like all stress, regardless of where it's coming from, just increases our need for nutrients, increases our need for energy. And anytime that we're experiencing imbalance, it means our stress is heavier than our recovery or our intake of nutrients or our ability to intake energy. And so, oftentimes with PCOS, it really does start with the adrenals. A lot of times the body's starting to pump out cortisol and adrenaline to try to really hyper-regulate blood sugar, because oftentimes, I think a lot of us, if we get honest with ourselves, we can look back and say, a lot of women, at least I know I did, and many of the girls I knew in high school, I can think of it as far back as even when I was little, I wasn't eating super nutrient dense. I wasn't eating the right foods. And then I started to diet. I think when I was 13 or 14, and I was definitely not eating enough calories. Even if it was from junk, I wasn't even eating enough. And then going from, being 13, 14, 15. And then I was a high school athlete, which a lot of girls are super athletic or active in high school. I was definitely not meeting my needs there. And then after graduating high school and entering college, again, I wasn't treating my body well. I was living off of coffee, snacking. There was no way I was fueling my body well, but my blood sugar was just going crazy. And I always tell women, what goes down must come up. We always are afraid have high blood sugar. Oh my gosh, our blood sugar is high. But if your blood sugar drops too low, you would die. And so that's really important to remember, because a lot of people are so focused on high blood sugar that they forget that the reason that blood sugar goes high is because it went low first. And the body has to respond to get blood sugar back up so you don't die. And it uses adrenal hormones to do that, these mineral corticoids and these other steroids to actually eat your own tissues, send it to the liver, and then the liver is going to make glucose to keep your blood sugar as stable as possible. And so these dramatic blood sugar swings are starting very young. And then, if depending on the type of trauma or stress you're exposed to, like that's just going to add to the problem. So by the time we're early 20s, mid 20s, maybe early 30s, our blood sugar has swung up and down with these dramatic swings for 15 years. And we can't expect our body to now have any type of stability. It can no longer keep stability. It's been fighting for stability for so long. And now it's depleted of minerals. Our mineral burn rate is so high when we're going through these dramatic swings. And then we add something in like medication, like birth control, which is actually designed to kind of rob us of our fertility. And how it does that in part is by depleting us of specific nutrients. It says you need these nutrients to make a baby. And so we have to deplete them in order so you can't make a baby. But those nutrients are not just for fertility, even though our fertility is, as we know, is very important. They're also for every other metabolic process in our body. Every cell in our body requires all of these nutrients to function: minerals, fat soluble vitamins, B vitamins. And then they need this to use energy. And if they don't have these nutrients, we don't use energy well. And once we stop using energy well, that's really when the disease cascade begins. Mitochondrial dysfunction.
I think that's really interesting, because I would say I have a similar experience, but from the other end of the spectrum. And I think this is really important to focus on too, is that people generally think it's a poor diet kind of thing, like the standard American diet and eating crap when you're in college and that sort of stuff. Whereas I come from the other end of the spectrum where I had a super healthy diet as a child. My mum ate her traditional foods, but we didn't have enough food because we didn't have a lot of money. And so I remember asking my mum sometimes, I'm still hungry. And she's like, well, there's no food left. So, I don't think we were starved, but, if you're playing sports as a teenager, like you definitely need a lot more food. Right. And then for me, it was very much growing up with an adrenal kind of purpose, I would say, an adrenal fuel state that you keep working and keep doing what you need to do, and you eat when you get time to. And this is something I really see with a lot of women. They're like, I've never eaten junk food, I've never eaten badly, but I have this adrenal fatigue or adrenal issues I don't understand. And it's exactly what you're talking about, this constant state of always being low blood sugar from accidentally fast. I call it accidental fasting. And same for me, then getting put on birth control because I had such period pain and all these kind of things and not really understanding why. Yeah. But I think it's interesting to always talk about it from those two different spectrums, because people always think it's an unhealthy food versus healthy food thing.
Yeah, I can't even explain like how many messages I get of like, it starts with, hey, I eat a generally healthy diet, but, and then they go on to list like their myriad of problems and symptoms and like painful periods, PMS, like, and then like, is there anything I can do? Because they perceive that like they have been eating a healthy diet. They're doing everything that they should be according to, the mainstream health and wellness advice. Like I've cut dairy. I don't eat very much red meat. I eat tons of green vegetables and tons of veggies. I drink a half a gallon of water every day. And it's like, they're perceiving as like, this is like the epitome of health. Like what more could I do? And they're, again, like you said, accidentally fasting or accidentally starving themselves. I like to go like a step further. They are really starved of sugar. Like they sit down and they count their macros and they're like, oh, I'm really eating maybe like 60 to 80 grams of carbohydrates a day. nobody's replenishing their glycogen stores. And then on top of it, they're doing these like high intensity interval training workouts like Orange Theory or F45, where it's just like go and just like jump around for an hour, not breathing, they're hyperventilating. And I'm like, of course you feel like trash. Like, of course, but it's just a perspective thing.
And I think with those people as well, unfortunately, in my experience, I've had people come to me who are slim. And so when they get diagnosed with something, it's like, well, you're not fat, so you must be healthy. So we don't know why this is happening.
Yeah, because healthy is either like you're thin and healthy or you're fat and not.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
Like,
so just go back on the pill.
Yeah. They're like, we don't really know what to do.
Yeah. And so I guess that key piece with the pill as well, right, that I always harp on with clients is that it stops your ovulation. Yeah. And ovulation is how women make their hormones. And we need progesterone from ovulation. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that and how important that is in that?
Yeah, we kind of have this very, like, I call it a symphony every month or every cycle where our body is constantly kind of doing this delicate dance, and it's a metabolic dance. And that's what we have to see it as, because I think some people like to separate like their thyroid and their adrenals and their metabolism from their cycle. And we know it's connected, but I want to like take it a step further and say that when you have hormone shift like women do, men's bodies do not do this hormonal shift the same way. You're doing a metabolic dance because, for 2 weeks out of your cycle, from the first 2 weeks, your body's preparing to drop an egg. So it's doing everything it can to prepare, like you shed your so you can build new uterine lining. The follicles are racing towards ovulation, very energy intensive shift. So your body's working towards growth and pushing towards ovulation. And then once ovulation occurs and that egg drops, now there's a possible fertilization that took place during that fertile window. And so now the whole body has to shift and prepare for a possible pregnancy because the implantation will take place in 2 weeks. And so it's a whole metabolic shift because now you are growing and building and working towards producing energy for a possible implantation and then fetus. And so that's where we have to see that our cycle plays a huge role in our energy metabolism. And with the different shifts in our hormones, we actually have different energy priorities throughout our cycle. And when we shut that down, which is when we stop ovulation, we're just shutting all of that down, which is what the pill does. Or at least most birth control pill options do, you are completely shutting down your own bioidentical or your own endogenous hormones. And now you're relying on outward synthetic hormones that do not act the same way, not for your bones, not for your heart, not for your brain, not for your uterus, your breast tissue. I can go on and on, your hair, your skin, your nails. Nothing is getting the benefit of your own hormones that you synthesize yourself anymore. And that is going to have huge metabolic repercussions, which is why when you open the insert on the birth control pill, it says, risk of stroke, risk of heart attack, increases your risk of all these things, cancer, because now the cells themselves are not getting the energy that they need.
It's pretty amazing. I still find it amazing that it's still so applicable in medicine. Like, that it's just being given out to young girls as well. I mean, I came off it in my 20s and I'm 40 now, so it feels so far away from me. And the joy of having a cycle, like the joy of having a cycle is and a cycle where you ovulate is, I feel like your birthright as a woman. Like it's amazing. It's amazing how different you feel when you get to experience that cycle and also get in tune with it. And then you're every month, you're like, did I treat myself right? Did I balance my life properly? Oh, I ovulated. Okay, cool. I did, like it's such beautiful, beautiful, beautiful feedback. And I love the way that you talk about everything being connected. Yeah. Like this is a real problem in medicine, I think. is
Yes.
that we really, look at, Paul Check would call it, like, look at everything through a straw. Okay, cool. Your knee hurts. Let me look at your knee.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you don't have periods. Well, okay, let's look at your uterus and your reproductive system. Oh, can't see anything wrong. Sorry. Don't know why. And not understanding this beautiful, beautiful system of systems that we have and how intricate they all are and how they work together.
And I like to remind women that our cycle is a spillover of energy, right? Our reproduction, although our birthright, it's in a time of abundance. I like to remind people that reproduction comes out of abundance, and we don't have a lot of abundance nowadays. And so the body is stuck in survival. It's not going to want to expend energy on reproduction, which is actually not necessary. So, in times of stress or times of famine. And so, if we want a good cycle, or we want a healthy cycle, or we want, a healthy period, we have to see it as like, okay, our body has shifted its resources to prioritize something else. And why is that?
So let's talk about some of the solutions, because some of the solutions I've had women come to me that they were told to do for their PCOS, whether they had actually had PCOS or not, I question. So a lot of them told to give up sugar. So low carb or sugar-free diets, and lose weight has been another one. So they'll do a calorie restriction to lose weight. And other than going back on the pill, but normally it's the women I come to work with are more in a fertile, want to have babies kind of age. So they're looking at fertility treatment as a solution. Yeah. And often a lot of them are told this goes away once you have a baby.
Yeah. Cross your fingers. Hopefully it will reset itself.
You'll have a baby, and so many women don't have period problems anymore or fertility problems after they have a baby. So let's just do IVF or whatever treatment we're going to do, and it'll go away.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some of the solutions and why they don't work now.
And I'll preface this by saying, I get messages all the time from clients, students that say hey, I just wanted to say I don't even have any markers of PCOS anymore. I don't even have, they're saying they don't know what happened. And I get messages like this all the time. And it makes me smile, and it makes me just feel giddy inside, because it's really, first of all they cared about was the lab numbers. They didn't actually care about how this person felt. But here, a lot of times these women are like, I feel so amazing. And it's usually ended by, and I feel fine that I had to gain the 10 pounds. So that's usually how it all ends. It's my lab numbers are normal. I feel great. I feel vibrant. I feel happy. And I'm feeling so much better about the 10 pounds I gained, And so I love that, because a lot of times when PCOS is thrown around, or these fixes for PCOS, it's always under the, you need to lose weight. You've got to lose weight. You've got to do whatever you can to lose weight. And so it's fasting's thrown around, low carb is often thrown around, keto, calorie restriction. And then just you need to exercise. You need to start exercising. And it's anything that's going to help you lose weight. And I like to shift women's perspectives first to, well, is losing weight, whatever weight is. I know you were recently been doing a healthy weight loss education series. And it's it's so important to understand that losing weight and losing fat are two very specific, different things. And losing fat requires the body to feel safe enough to start burning through the fuel it's stored for later. And the reason why we store fuel for later is because our body is feeling safe or unsafe. It's not feeling it it can rely on the fuel coming in, or there's something inconsistent about our habits. And so when we say oh, you just need to lose weight, there's a right way and a wrong way to go about losing weight. And oftentimes, because PCOS is often thrown around with like, oh, you're overweight, so you need to just lose weight to get rid of your PCOS. The problem with that is a lot of women are attempting to lose weight at all costs, including the cost of their own health. And they're so focused, like you said, like looking through a straw on the weight loss or the pounds going down on the scale or the kilos going down on the scale, that they're completely forgetting that all their other health markers are going down the drain, or just not even aware that that's a problem. And this is why a lot of women are saying like, I'm losing weight, but my hair loss is getting worse. Or why is my acne getting worse? Or why is my hirsutism, like, beard growth or belly hair growth, like getting worse, or why am I feeling so tired or so depressed or so anxious, or I can't sleep at night anymore. My moods are bad. And they're always like, does this have to do with PCOS? Like, do I have insomnia because I have PCOS? And it's like, no, you have insomnia because your body's running on adrenaline, from your habits. And so it's really just first of all, like shifting this perspective of we didn't get here by having like a keto deficiency. It wasn't like, oh, you weren't doing keto and that's why you got here in the first place. Or like, oh, you weren't doing, running every day, so that's why you got here. Or, oh, you weren't doing low carb, so that's why you got here. So why do you think he's going to get you out of this place? That's why, like, I try to shift people's perspective. Is it was the eating inconsistencies that was the biggest problem. People are not. They have to get real with themselves and say, am I eating enough protein, carb, and fat for my body in a balanced way, in a consistent way, every day, every 3 to 4 hours? Like, am I doing that? And most people say no. Like, I've never done that in my life. Like, I've never given my body enough of something in my life. It's always been a restriction. It's always been going long periods without eating. It's always been the accidental fasting. It's always been the black coffee on the empty stomach. And so why don't we try something different and not try something so extreme and just focus on giving the body what it needs? Because that makes the most sense to me. If the body's expressing imbalances in symptoms and you want your symptoms to go away, then it would be a good idea to start focusing on creating balance within your body again. And doing extremes is not creating balance. That's just creating more imbalance.
And it's with the weight thing, I have to say that, again, it's one of those things that some people will put on weight in this stress state and some people will lose weight in this stress state. And I have plenty of women that come and work with me who are 20 kilos overweight, who are eating like 1,000 calories a day. Because they're just that far down the rung of the nervous system, and they're on metformin and they're like doing all this exercise and still eating this 1,000 calorie paleo kind of diet and just getting bigger and bigger. So yeah, I love that we're both very similar. It's like, well, what are you giving your body, and does it meet the output that you're putting on your body, and is it consistently like, I love your program's called Fully Nourished, right? Like, that's the key, is like looking at, are you nourished? Like, do you have everything you need to get that egg to drop every month?
Yep.
Right?
And most women don't. I mean, most women don't even know what that looks like, because our society really values something completely different, right? Values the hustler, values the person that just like, never miss a Monday, and values the, no pain, no gain. And that is valued. And so it's really hard to shift your perspective and say like, hey, what is my body asking for? Instead of punishing my body, instead of, pushing my body, what if I just like took a step back and just like listened to it for a second and tried to hear what it's saying? And when we have these imbalances, that can be hard because we have a really tumultuous relationship with our bodies. But that's where we have to, instead of shift this warlike mentality, which I see a lot of women have, they're like, I'm fighting PCOS or I'm fighting endometriosis. And I'm like, that's just your body's expression that it's stressed, doesn't have what it needs. Like, we got to stop fighting it. And we really do need to start, as cliche as it sounds, listening to our bodies so that we can get get out of where we're at. Like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. But that's what people are doing. Like they keep jumping on a diet. It's not working. So they get off of it because they're starving. And then they're like, oh, I got to get back to that. And you probably see that with your clients all the time when they first start with you. It's just like, they'll say, even the language that they use is like, oh, but like I was doing this at one point and it was working like so well, like I lost all this weight, or they'll say something like that. And you're like, but you're here now. Like it didn't work because it left you here now. And that's where like our perspective definitely has to shift.
Yeah. It's coming back to that. Yeah. PCOS is not a diet problem. It is an expression of the body saying, please help me. Please listen to me. Please look after yourself. Please love yourself. Please take the time to eat, to rest, to rejuvenate, to, you know, and get out of that, like you say, that hustle state, that adrenaline junkie kind of state. So, yeah, do you think it's similar then for the women who are thin getting diagnosed with PCOS? Is it anything different that you're seeing? Like,
I mean, I can see that there tend to be more of those like, what you would say, like I would say a higher nervous system state. So they just have a different way that they handle stress, because like I'm the type of person, and I know many women with PCOS are the type of people that when they are struggling with their symptoms, they tend to put on weight and put on fat. And what I've found is if I'm under eating, I put on weight like crazy. So I did everything I could, like, you know, low carb, low calorie, paleo, and I could not understand why none of those things helped me lose weight. The minute that I added carbohydrates back in and I increased my calories was the minute that I was able to sustain a healthy weight. Of fat just went away. And so it's just interesting to me because it's just a different expression. These women that are super lean, you know, those types of people, you probably have worked with them. They just have no body fat. They eat through their muscle very quickly. They have a very hard time gaining muscle. They tend to be like stress cadets, where they're just like always stressed. They usually have like high pitched voices. You know, it's a type of person. And I do think that there are obviously genetics involved as well, but it's just a different metabolic state. You're just handling your stress in a different way. So instead of pushing fuel into storage for later, which is actually a protective mechanism. And if you look at the research, it shows that people that are overweight actually tend to have less cardiac events than, say, like the really super lean marathon runner who has very little fat on their body, but also doesn't have a lot of muscle mass. And so I think that those people just are in such a heightened state of like nervous dysfunction or nervous system dysfunction that they're just burning through energy, and they're probably wasting a lot of energy, I would guess. Those are usually the types of people that can eat like 3,000 calories and they have a hard time gaining weight.
Yeah, I used to be one of those people, but then it kind of flipped on its head. Hey, it was so interesting. I always find it interesting looking back at how much that adrenaline junkie was in me, and I would literally, every time I got stressed, I couldn't eat when I was stressed, and then I would just lose all this weight. I'd literally have bones poking out. But what was always interesting with that is people always assumed I was healthy.
Isn't that fascinating?
I know, right? Like no one ever told me. Like people would often compliment me, oh, wow, like you must be training really hard right now because you're looking really lean. And I'm like, I'm fucking starving. Like,
it's awful.
I know, I look awful. This is gross. And I look back at pictures of myself and I'm like, this is so gross. And I always, like, working in the fitness industry, I never wanted to be that thin. I wanted to be muscly so I could go to like events with colleagues and everyone stop picking on me.
Yeah. I wish I could gain some mass.
I know, it's so different. So I want to come back to like some tools, some resources for people at the end, but I feel like we should talk about endometriosis now because I feel like the resources and the tools are very similar for both, really, and the approach. So let's talk about endometriosis and what your experience has been with, you know, the diagnosis, what it is, and I'd love to hear that from you.
Yeah. And I think like with endometriosis, it can be hard because a lot of women, I will bring up the fact that like a lot of women with PCOS, there are some women that have both endo and PCOS. And then I do see a lot of similarities in the habits that these women are practicing. And so if we're really stuck on the body's expression of symptoms or the diagnosis, we can get in this really like ego space of saying like, well, my issue is different. Like my issue is I'm this like unique snowflake unicorn. You know what I mean? And it's like, but my issue is more complicated. And don't, like I always say, especially to endo, I see this a lot with people who are struggling with endometriosis, don't fall into that trap, because when you start falling into that trap, you're really crippling yourself. Because a lot of times women with endo are similar, like not practicing really good blood sugar balance, are often not ovulating regularly or having anovulatory cycles, very low progesterone. And that endo and PCOS both tend to be an estrogen dominant condition. So there's a lot of estrogen dominance involved, and usually a lot of like iron dysregulation issues, which is just mineral dysregulation. So, you know, magnesium burn rate is very high. You need magnesium, you need your electrolytes. You also really need to practice good blood sugar control. And then with endo, it's a little different because there is some research showing that there's the body's having a harder time breaking down estrogen. And so there really does need to be some liver support there, and also a lot of awareness as to environmental estrogens, or these xenoestrogens that we now have in our environment. So plastics, cleaning chemicals, drinking out of plastic water bottles, all of that kind of stuff. Like if I had endo, and even if, having PCOS, like it's really, you do want to be aware of environmental estrogens no matter who you are. But if you're someone with endo, like they're probably directly impacting your symptoms on a monthly basis. And it's a good idea to really practice like a cleanup of the environment, and also internal estrogens. I mean, and this is where like, I'm sure you cringe. I definitely cringe when I see like nuts and seeds being pushed, and, removing dairy and replacing it with these estrogenic milks like nut milks and pea milks, not really focusing in on getting enough protein, which is going to really impair liver detoxification of estrogen and really like slow down digestion. And then just kind of like, doing these restrictive diets, like not enough carbs, or, make sure you go paleo, or make sure you go vegan, or whatever it might be, and not actually focusing on what does the body need, like giving the body what it needs, not trying to restrict it of what it quote unquote doesn't need.
I want to come back to the liver piece because it's really important. I think every time someone hears liver, they think, oh my God, I have to do a liver detox. I've got to drink lemon water and not eat. So let's come back to the liver piece. Yeah. It's really important. But so what is it, what happens in the body with endometriosis?
Yeah. So a lot of times they'll say like it's just a buildup of endometrial tissue, or almost like uterus, which is like the tissue that kind of surrounds the uterus. And it can cause a lot of tissue buildup, which can cause a lot of pain, cramping, heavy periods, very heavy bleeds. But oftentimes it's characterized by a lot of pain. And then eventually sometimes the tissue will build up so much that they'll want to remove it surgically. And then, some women have it quote unquote so bad that the endometrial tissue will build up, or even in the tissue surrounding the uterus. So like intestines and things like that. So that tells me, I'm just, I'm no medical doctor, but that tells me that there's something else going on, especially if you surgically remove it and then it just comes back. There's something, encouraging that pathology. There's something encouraging this growth to happen. And we know that estrogen is the hormone of growth and cellular proliferation. And then I see that many women with endometriosis just have such poor estrogen detoxification and are often so like they have such a bad relationship with their cycle that they're not actually working to restore and bring balance to the cycle. And so many of them are very progesterone deficient or not ovulating. And there are so many women who have used progesterone very successfully in helping with endometriosis symptoms, which tells me that there's something with progesterone and estrogen that is involved.
You know, I think, well, it's important to remember, right, because estrogen actually, it's when we're stressed or there's something damaged or broken in the body, it sends, you know, it tries to deal with that stress by sending more estrogen to that place, right? So
yeah,
the actual endometriosis, the extra tissue is not because it's what am I trying to say here? It's like there's something deeper going on. The tissue is growing there because there was a stress there before.
Right.
So just getting rid of that excess endometrium lining is just like putting a new bandaid on.
Yeah.
You know, because your body's like, oh, I've got to keep covering this up and keep looking after this. So I'm just going to build up the tissue again.
Right. Yeah. And like the body doesn't do anything on accident. Everything is on purpose. And so even these imbalances that we kind of ask, like, why is this happening to me? Like, this is horrible. We need to take a step back. And this applies to hormonal imbalances too, and say, what is the body compensating for? What is the body trying to protect you from? Because the body is obsessed with survival and keeping as much homeostasis or balance as possible. And if you're experiencing imbalances, it literally cannot keep balance anymore. And that's what we should be asking ourselves is, why is the body doing this specific thing? And estrogen does hang out in damaged tissue. Iron also hangs out in damaged tissue. And interestingly enough, estrogen does act as an antioxidant within the body. So if there's a lot of oxidation happening, a lot of inflammation happening, estrogen will be there to quote unquote protect from the oxidation. We know that polyunsaturated fats cause an increase in oxidation right in the body. These fats are oxidizing. We know that iron does the same thing. So that tells me that if estrogen is hanging out and you can't get a handle on your estrogen dominance, then there might be a reason why that is happening. And that's why like your body's fighting you on it. And so, yeah, with endometriosis, I definitely believe there's something in the tissue that the body's protecting you from or trying to protect from. And it's being expressed with this excessive tissue buildup and scarring.
100%. Because I think there's another problem there where people can get obsessed with the estrogen detoxification part and go, estrogen's the problem. But like what you're saying, and I agree with, is like, no, we've got to look underneath that.
Yeah.
That, like, you know, and let's talk about iron, for instance, because you've mentioned both of those you mentioned that in both PCOS and endometriosis, and something definitely that I'm seeing is a lot of women getting diagnosed with low iron and put on iron supplementation. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that results in this tissue?
Yeah. So that's kind of, there's a long history to it, and we could talk for hours about how, the history of how this low iron diagnosis came about and anemia came about. But to kind of shorten up the story, anemia was a lab produced condition of low iron. They actually produced this condition in rats, and they were able to, then what happened was they started to test the ferritin of pregnant women or the iron of pregnant women, and they realized that some pregnant women had low iron at a certain phase of their pregnancy. What they refused to acknowledge was that phase of pregnancy, the body actually gives iron over to the baby. And so you are supposed to be low in iron because you just downloaded a bunch of iron into your baby. And so they just said like, oh, it's a low iron, like, you know, these pregnant women are low in iron. And so let's start adding iron to the whole population's food, just excessive amounts of iron. And these were just like iron shavings, straight up. You could take a magnet over it and it would stick, like lots of iron in our food. And it's in all pretty much processed grain products. And then they also added ascorbic acid, which is like kind of the shell of vitamin C, which is pretty much synthetic vitamin C, to act as a preservative in a lot of foods. And this actually kind of almost is like taking a magnifying glass and making this like iron worse. And so here we are, women especially are very good at absorbing iron. Nature is amazing, right? Because we do lose some every month. And here we're eating 2,000% the amount of our daily value every day because it's fortified in our grain products. And so we're just pounding iron throughout our childhood. If you ever ate like any type of cereal, Cheerios or whatever, getting tons and tons of iron. And then on top of it, ascorbic acid is increasing that absorption of that iron. And so our body is constantly recycling iron. It's very good at recycling it. It doesn't need very much at all. And anytime there's an excess, it has a very hard time getting rid of it. And so it just pushes it into storage, and it pushes it into the bone tissue, pushes it into the liver, the kidneys, the spleen, until these organs are actually full of iron. And then disease actually begins to occur because if you think of, our oxygen-rich bodies, we have iron and we have oxygen. And if you've ever been by like the beach and you've seen like old cars just rusting, whenever there's oxygen and iron, there's rust. And that's pretty much what's happening inside the body when we have excess unchecked iron. And you can think about how much free radicals that's creating and how much oxidation or inflammation that's creating within the body. It's a huge issue. And so when we have low, quote unquote, low ferritin, which is oftentimes now how they're diagnosing low iron, which is a very poor marker of your iron status. Unfortunately, that usually means that we have a lot stuck in our tissues and not a lot in our bloodstream. And that is a mineral dysregulation that has nothing to do with iron and has everything to do with minerals like copper, magnesium, sodium, potassium, boron, and then just energy and stress hormones. When a body's under stress or there's a lot of trauma or pain or injury, iron attracts to those sites in the body.
That was such a good explanation.
It's like, that's very, very simplified, but...
it was really good.
Okay.
You're really good at making things simple. And, I think on top of that, pregnant women are told not to eat organ meats because they're toxic, and organ meats are full of vitamin A and copper, which help recirculate iron,
yep.
and which we need to add to our diet every day.
Right.
We've become so far removed from the natural way we were meant to eat, right?
Yes.
And like you said, you're talking about all those minerals you're talking about, they're so important to the adrenal system, like magnesium and boron. And so when we're so highly stressed, we're actually affecting that system. And so if you guys go back and listen to the episode with Tomo, he talks about the bloodstream being like the highway, and then that the cars have to get off the highway and pull into a cell, or they'll pull into fat to deposit what's being carried through the blood. So it might not be in the blood, it could be in the cell, or it could be in a fat store, or, I think that's a really interesting episode to look at when you're getting blood labs for these conditions, to understand the limitations of those and what's really going on. So with endometriosis, I guess, let's come back to the liver now, because this is the part where people go, oh my God, I need to detoxify my liver. Yeah. So yes, like drinking less alcohol is a big, big one. But people think of, the liver as a detoxification organ, and so they should detoxify their liver to heal their liver. And then you have all these people who are doing paleo, but they have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Do you want to just touch lightly on the relationship with liver and these conditions?
Yeah. So the first thing, I think a lot of people are told that the liver is a filter, and that's where like all the confusion comes from. Stop thinking about the liver as a filter. It's not a filter. It's a battery pack, and it's actually the cornerstone of our metabolism. And its job, it has over 500 jobs, but one of its many jobs is to actually store nutrients. So we have a specific vein that goes from our gut to our liver, and many of the things that are being absorbed in the bloodstream from the gut are going to the liver, and then the liver gets to kind of store up all these nutrients. It's like a storage storage tank, and it gets to actually send nutrients to the cells as they need. So it's actually the regulator of what gets released into the bloodstream oftentimes. And that's why it's so good at, it doesn't want toxins to get into the bloodstream. And so that's why we want our liver working really well, because we want it being able to very quickly and efficiently differentiate between the nutrients that we need, the toxins that need to get broken down and eliminated. And so that's why these organs like liver or kidneys are very nutrient dense organs, because that is where our body stores nutrients. These are highly, highly functioning cells that require lots of energy, lots of nutrients. They're doing hundreds and hundreds of jobs for our body every second of every day. And our liver is not filtering out toxins. It's actually breaking them down. So it goes through two phases. Oftentimes with most toxins, it's going to go through phase one, which is taking many fat soluble toxins and actually turning them into water soluble toxins. So you can think of it as like changing the molecular structure or the chemistry of many toxins. And then in phase two, it will actually like kind of more package them up and make them ready for elimination. And then once they're ready to go, the bile will be then moved to the gallbladder. The gallbladder will concentrate that bile, and then it'll be secreted into the small intestine when we eat a fatty meal or any meal, and go through the digestive tract to be eliminated when we have a bowel movement. And so that's how our body gets rid of toxins. It's not a filter. It's actually a highly, highly intelligent processing plant where it's going through constant chemistry shifts and using nutrients to do it. And so things like alcohol, the reason why they can make us feel quote unquote toxic is not because they store up in the liver. It's because they deplete us of nutrients like B vitamins and magnesium and minerals very, very quickly. And those are nutrients that our body uses for other very important metabolic processes as well.
Can you also talk about, that was awesome, by the way, you're so good at this. Can you also talk about carbohydrate and the liver?
Yeah. So I always say like a fed liver is a healthy liver. And you can think of, I kind of just explained how many jobs or how the kind of depth of the jobs that the liver is doing. It's doing so many things at all times of the day. It's a very energy intensive organ. And so we can't expect the liver to run on nothing. That's why I always like laugh when people are like, "Oh, I'm on a cleanse, or I'm on a juice fast, or I'm on like a liver detox," and I'm like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And they're like, "Oh, I just drink the shake like 3 times a day, and I'm doing that for a week." And I'm like, your body needs not just, when you look at phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification, it requires a ton of amino acids. So protein's the first thing that you need for liver detoxification. If you're not eating protein, especially animal protein, your liver is struggling. So sorry, vegans. I'm so sorry, vegetarians. Your liver is struggling, period, end of story. And then on top of it, our liver can store about 130 grams of glycogen at all times. And glycogen is pretty much just stored glucose or stored sugar that can be turned into glucose at any time to release into the bloodstream, because one of the liver's jobs is to keep our blood sugar stable. And a healthy help keep blood sugar stable for about 8 hours of not eating. So if we go 8 hours without eating, a healthy liver that's full of glycogen can actually slowly release glucose into the bloodstream and keep our blood glucose levels stable. Unfortunately, most of us do not have healthy livers, or we do not do a good job of keeping our glycogen stores full. And so that's when our liver is struggling. So if we want good liver function, we need to eat plenty of carbohydrates to keep our liver full of glycogen. And that is where our thyroid conversion happens as well. So it's just interesting how, your perspective will shift, but a fed liver is a healthy liver. And if you want your liver functioning on all cylinders, you want to be eating very regularly and eating the right things.
And that position of like, a healthy liver can go 8 hours without food. That is an emergency.
Exactly. That's an emergency.
Yeah. It's like we didn't find an animal to kill this. So we've got to do more work to find something. Whereas in our modern day, it's like our livers are so overburdened with stress that they're unable to cope with that 8 hours. And this is where that people always say, but cavemen fasted and that's why they were so healthy. And that's part, our liver can do that, go 8 hours without food. So we should be, trying to do that for our health. But that's not taking into account that cavemen didn't have mortgages and they didn't sit in front of blue light all day. They, didn't have 4 or 5 relationships and maybe have parents who gave them negative issues about their body image and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
It's pulling stuff out of context. And so, yeah, if you're healthy, like it's really hard work when you are in this state where you have this blood sugar dysregulation. Like, it's really hard work. You don't want to get to that place because, like, for me, it's like, oh my God, I have to eat or I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. Or, I can't go longer than 3 or 4 hours without food. There is no emergency.
Right. And I work with a lot of people who are recovering from like low carb diets and keto. And like, once your liver is in that state, it's not only do you have to practice blood sugar balance, like you said, like eat every 3 to 4 hours or you feel like you're almost going to die or like you can't focus, like really bad reactive hypoglycemia. It gets to a point where the liver actually can't store up enough sugar. Like, think of it almost as like you have now overburdened your liver so much that every time you go to consume food, it's going to other places and it's not even storing up in the liver at all. And so some people can only make it 2 hours after a meal at first because their liver has gotten so inefficient at storing sugar and it's having to send it to everywhere else and not keep it in the liver. So it really takes time to heal once you get to that place where you're constantly depleting your liver's glycogen stores. I mean, the 8 hours of sleep you're sleeping per night is plenty.
Oh yeah, that's a fast.
Yeah, exactly.
That's totally a fast. And that's where we need to focus, because we also have this circadian clock and our digestive system actually starts ramping up really early in the morning and moving meals earlier. And there's so much stuff that we can do to have that fast at nighttime while we're sleeping. It's always funny too. I find when people say to me they want to do intermittent fasting and they do a food log and I'm like, you're already fasting.
Yeah. No need to try. You're already going to do it.
So how is doing it more going to make it any better?
Yeah, good job. Check that off your list.
Yeah, you tried it. You're done. Yeah. My friend's doing it though and they feel amazing. I said, I think they just skipped breakfast and they've called it something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all it is. And that's that piece, right, of people not understanding that these conditions, PCOS, endometriosis, are quite often an expression of all of these low carb, fasting, doing HIIT. I mean, I was speaking to someone the other day who fasts till 11 and does HIIT 6 mornings a week, and they fast till 11. So they do HIIT at 6 a.m. and then
I used to do that.
Oh my God. I've actually never done that because I was always too hungry, but mine was more working. Oh shit, I forgot to eat. I was working so hard. But I just, wow, how do you function? How do you get to 11 a.m. without food when you've done a HIIT workout? Like that's intense.
Yeah.
That's really intense.
Yeah. I know for me, it's like one of those things where it's definitely a trade, life is a series of choices. And so you're trading your future. Like, I've had to pay for the habits that I had years ago. And I don't know if my physiology will ever truly fully recover from it. I'm going to try, but I have a completely different metabolism. I'm in a completely different state. I have a completely different resilience to stress than I once did. And I'm not as resilient to stress. And it might take years because I did that for years. It's going to take me years to build back that resilience. I pulled from my future to do something stupid in the now. And that's what I try to remind people of, like, what you're doing now, it might feel really good and it might feel like it's working and giving you quick results. But can you sustain it for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? And if not, where are you going to be at that period of time? Because you're going to be really kicking yourself.
Yeah. And it's so like I've got endometriosis, I've got PCOS. This is a wake up call.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's my body asking me to treat it better. And so, you might have to go out and seek the person that's going to hold space for you to actually do that work. And let's talk a little about the work, because I think that people find out about, oh my God, I don't eat enough. So and I don't eat carbs. So I heard that milk is really good, but I haven't had milk for 10, 20 years. And I haven't had any carbohydrates for 10 years, but I'm going to go and drink orange juice and I'm going to eat potato. And just all of a sudden, let's just talk about that for a second.
Yeah. Yeah. So first we have to like get realistic about what has happened. And I think a lot of us, it really starts with like, well, this has been done to me. Like a lot of people have that mentality of like, this has been done to me because we took outside information. We trusted the experts, right? The quote unquote experts, and we allow them to overtake our innate sense of what our body needs, right? So we kind of allowed this outward influence to shift our perspective on our own bodies. And so I see a lot of people have a victim mentality, which is like, this has been done to me, you know? And so we have to first get out of that mindset and say like, this was a series of choices. We don't need to beat ourselves up about it, but this is where we're at. And so now we want to get out of where we're at. And so we have to slowly do the work to get out. Now, many people are afraid of food. I mean, that's at least in my experience. Like we find lots of fear around dairy, lots of fear around, I mean, I see fear around gluten. I don't like encourage people to eat gluten, but I say like a little bit of sourdough bread's not going to kill you. And then lots of fear around sugar, right? So we have like the three fears of like, they have been so entrained to have a nervous system response to these foods that if they actually like eat them, they have such a freak out that I think their body gets like bloated or they get constipated, mostly because their mind is controlling that. Not even, I don't even know if the food, it's actually a food reaction. I think it's a brain reaction, but that's just me. So there's a lot of mental things, like kind of hurdles we have to really break through before we just decide to open the floodgates and start chugging orange juice from the bottle. Yeah. And it's also this state of like, it's not necessarily about the carbs. It's not necessarily about the this or the that or all the new things I'm allowed to eat. It's easy to get stuck on that stuff. And yes, those are foods that are really nourishing and can provide a lot of nutrients, but it's really about creating balance again. That's the point of all of it. And I think sometimes when we've swung so far in one direction, we sometimes need to swing really far in the other direction to find balance. It's sometimes a part of the process. It's this like, we've swung so far one way, now we got to swing the other way to kind of eventually meet ourselves in the middle and find this place where we've settled. And I see that kind of as a pattern where that does happen often, where people are so far restricted and then all of a sudden they're eating like pints of ice cream, you know, and they're just like, it's just like, I can't stop, or like, all I do is crave orange juice and I'm just chugging orange juice. Like I'm going through like 7 cartons a week or whatever it might be. And I'm like, you know, that's okay. Like give yourself space for that and permission, but know that that's not necessarily creating balance in the body either, you know? And eventually like what goes up must come down and you're going to feel like, whoa, I think I set myself back a little bit. And so it's really about taking steps to create balance and meet your body where it's at. And some of us are in a place where we've been restricted for 10, 15 years. And so it's probably not a good idea to like just jump in, you know, no holds barred. Like you got to kind of like take some baby steps to get there. And kind of like if you're in a place where like you don't need any dairy, you don't need any carbohydrates, then start with something small and start slowly adding things in. Don't go crazy and then start complaining about like, oh my God, like I have all these problems and it's not working. Of course, like pounding ice cream is not working.
I think it's important to get a picture of where you're at, because I see a lot of people make these changes and they're all of a sudden eating a diet that's really high in carbs, really high in fat and no protein, still really low protein.
None. Yeah.
So, you know, it's really important to use something like so easy. Just use Chronometer, pop in your food, what you're doing right now, and have a look at it and go, okay, well, what are my macros? Like you need to learn what macros are. You can't just go and have 2 liters of orange juice. Like you can't go from, like you said, like eating 50 grams of carbohydrate a day and go, oh, I heard you're meant to eat 180, 200 grams of carbohydrate a day. It's a slow process. I think what I'm seeing is a lot of people believing that to get well, you have to put the healing pounds are like, what did you say in pounds, when it's kilos, I would say like 20, 30 kilos of weight. Part of the process of healing. And that's that's not what it is. It's just people going too fast. Do you want to explain the healing pounds of it? Because I know you talk about that a bit on your channel.
Yeah, I believe like what you said is like almost 60 pounds. I think it's like two pounds for everything. Yeah. So that's a lot. So when I teach about the healing pounds, it's more of just like a, hey, heads up, if you've been in a really stressed out state, right? You're stuck in adrenaline response, your cortisol is very high, which sensitizes your belly fat cells. You got to think of that as like you're stuck in a famine, and your body needs a certain amount of body fat to create heat. And also remember, all fat is stored fuel for later. There's glucose in there, there's free fatty acids in there. And so you have vital organs. You have organs that you need to survive in your abdomen. And, we have our heart, our lungs, we have our intestines, our liver, all that kind of stuff. And then we have our reproductive organs. And so those are organs that our body wants to protect, keep safe, and also make sure are warm and also have enough fuel to function. And so when we're in a state of stress or a constant state of famine, we can think of it as the minute that and oftentimes many women are under eating severely, they're not even eating enough to fuel their basic daily functions. Like if they were just laying like a blob on the couch, they still wouldn't be eating enough calories just to fuel their respiratory system or their nervous system. And so when you start to increase the intake of calories, your body has gotten so efficient at using energy at the expense of probably a lot of your cells, right? That's why your hair is falling out. That's why your nails are brittle. That's why your skin might not look as youthful as it used to. Your body has gotten really efficient at cutting corners. And so when you start to intake more energy, your body doesn't just automatically go, oh my gosh, more energy, I'm going to use it so well. Your body's like taking slow steps, like, okay, we got to make sure that this is going to be consistent. We got to make sure that this is going to, continue. And in the meantime, let's put a little bit in storage for later, just in case we don't get this consistent fueling again. And so there is a period of time, oftentimes, like after a famine, we're going to be very primed to put on fat, especially if that famine's been going on for 20 years or whatever, 15 years, 10 years. And when you dramatically jump in your energy intake, which is all calories are, that's going to automatically result in some type of fat storage. Now, how much that's going to be is really going to depend on you, your history, where your metabolism is at, and how stressed your body really was. And some people, their bodies were very, very stressed, and they really needed a good amount of safety. I like to call fat safety. Mm. And so that's when you'll rapidly gain like 5 to 10 pounds, which would be, I think, like around 5 kilos, right when you start to eat enough, get enough calories, get enough protein, carb, and fat. Doesn't matter what you do. Doesn't matter if it was like the perfect balance of macros. It just had to happen. Your body needed to gain some fat. And this is where the healing pounds, like it can become kind of tricky, because some people are just eating like they're not balancing their macros. They're eating, like you said, way too much carbs, way too much fat, not enough protein, and they just continue to gain weight. They just gain. Whereas healing pounds and safety pounds is oftentimes a series of weight gain about 6 months after you get out of that stress response, and it stops, it plateaus. And it usually plateaus around, I like to say, 5 to 30 pounds, which I think is like around 15 kilos. Mm-hmm. Anything more than 30 pounds, and if it just continues and keeps going, that shows the body is still unstable. There's still metabolic issues at play, or there's some type of imbalance occurring from the current nutrition that you're practicing. So healing pounds are there for a reason. Oftentimes, like especially for women who are underweight or very, very lean, they're over-exercising, they're under-eating, they often need the like good 10 to 15 pounds of that safety weight. And they often find that, okay, like my period came back, or my period's much better, my energy is much better, my mood's much better, my mental clarity is better, my sleep's better, like all of those things. But if none of those things are improving and you're just continuing to gain, that's no longer safety weight. That's just fat. And you've got to figure out why your body's feeling like it needs to continue to push fuel into storage. There's something that's keeping your body from using energy well, and it's still trying to be really efficient and cut corners. And that's like kind of getting to the root of what stressors are. That could be emotional stress, that could be structural stress, that could be something as simple as like not sleeping enough or not prioritizing sleep. The list kind of goes on and on. It could be something as simple as just really eating not enough protein and eating way too much fat and carbs.
And I think this is where it's really helpful to work with a practitioner.
Yeah.
Because like when I work with people, this is so complicated. Well, it's not to us because
yeah,
we do it all the time. Like it's nutrition 101, macros and calories is like nutrition 101. So it's simple for us. But if you are going to do it on your own, to start with chronometer and just look at where you're at and make small increases. I think it's different for everybody too, right? Like some of my clients are so paranoid about putting on weight. We go super, super, super slow. And they're kind of willing to put up with more symptoms.
Yep.
And then I've got other clients who are like, I just want to sleep.
Yeah.
And so we go a bit faster and they sleep and they're like, oh, I'm a bit fatter, but I actually don't care because I'm sleeping. So, it's always like that balance of ego with people as well. Like, I think that comes into it. And I think that's something warranted, like there's purpose in wanting to look better and wanting to look a certain way, and that there's purpose in that. And I think if you work with the right coach, they can help you sit in a safe place with that, the appropriate place. And I think a lot of it is, like I talked about in that weight loss series, is working out where you get the idea of what weight you should be for starters. Because so many people I speak to are so underweight and they have no muscle mass. And what you actually want is a different look. It's not a scale. It's not a scale number. What you want is a different look, and this is what Libby, I love the way Libby talks about this is she really, I was listening to her, I joined her macro challenge to get some which I know you speak on, some motivation for my strength training, because obviously macro ninja, I can do it in my sleep. But I love the way she talks to her audience about it's a look that you're wanting to change, not a scale weight, dress size. You want to look in the mirror and see definition and tightness in your skin and stuff. That's totally different to losing fat, losing weight, I should say. So, women need to be really careful about that, especially all these women doing all this HIIT and they're losing muscle actually, not
and probably like bone mass. It's a complete what people, a lot of women are after that, and they don't recognize is they want a complete body recomposition. Like I want my bones to be really strong and thick. I want my brain tissue to be healthy, my liver tissue to be healthy, my skin tissue to be healthy, and then I want my body using a lot of energy to build muscle. And that's oftentimes going to look heavier or you're going to look the same weight. And that's what coaches know, and they can kind of point you in the right direction when you're working with the right person. Like you said, it's being constantly reminded, like taking your goals, like what are your goals? What's the most important thing to you? Priorities. Because some people are like, well, I want to look good, but I also want to be sleeping. I also don't want my hair to fall out, and I want my cycle to be better. And it's like, okay, we have to take all those goals and then we have to filter that through and create a plan that's going to get you to where you want to go in the order that's important to you. Because sometimes people say like, oh, I just want to look better. But they actually, when they start to look better, but they feel like crap because they're, they aren't making changes fast enough. They're like, actually, you know what? The sleep is more important to me, or the hair loss is more important to me. I actually want to focus on that. And I don't really care, like if I have to gain 5 to 10 pounds. So everyone's kind of in a different mindset. And you do need, I think, like having a practitioner, a coach, or a plan, it can be so helpful to your mindset, and you get there so much faster because you don't have this, like, I call it like stepping in the icy cold water. And then you're like, oh my God, it's cold. And you pull out. So you're like, then you stay on the bank for like another 3 months. And then you're like, okay, let me try again. And then like, oh, nope, I got too cold. So it's this constant, like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Sometimes when you're on your own, because you're really unsure of where you're going. When if you have someone guiding you and they just pull you into the icy water and they say like, it's going to be cold but you're going to be fine. And we're going to get to the other side. It's going to be okay. That can make all the difference in the world.
I think too, what's really important is to understand that you're built, you said the word like little snowflake before. I think people have become so stress intolerant, but they're also scared of having stress in their life.
Yes.
And part of this healing process is learning how to implement enough stress in the right way for you to grow and be able to handle more stress. And it could be quite possible, like Jess and I both feel like I could not handle the level of stress that I was doing before, but like I don't want to work the hours that I worked before. Like that's too much stress. Like there is no denying anything that is just too much stress. So it's are you being, what's your filter on about stress? Like, I think Libby was saying someone in her program was just like, she was saying the program was stressing her out because it wasn't, easy enough for her to follow or something, or, what she really needs is a personal coach was what she was saying. Which is fine, but we have to get out of this place of like, oh my God, I can't use a mobile phone because it's going to stress me out, and I can't go to a friend's place because they won't have enough carbs and it's going to stress me out, or I can't go over to my friend's house because they've got mold in their house and I don't want to breathe in the mold, and oh my God, we and this whole thing of exercise intolerance comes out, right? Because I used to do HIIT 6 days a week and now I can't exercise. I'm exercise intolerant. I think this is a really important part when you work with the right coach. They're going to go, well, actually, if you want that body composition, you need strength training. And strength training increases your mitochondria, which is really important for your metabolism. But if you go too quickly, that's when you're going to get damage. But if you learn to build the foundations of strengths and build yourself up to that, and then at the same time you're building carbohydrates so that you can have energy to muscle growth. It's a process. It's not you need to strength train, go and lift 100 kilo deadlift, 180 grams of carb, and then wonder why you're putting on weight and you're exercise intolerant and you're fatigued, and it's a real process. So I think it's a really good opportunity to talk about your program and how it works for women and how women can work with you, because you do have a very strategic way of helping women with these hormonal issues. And I love the name of your program, Fully Nourished.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I'm always transparent about, I worked one-on-one with many women over the past couple of years. And last year it was just kind of like, I need to take a small step back. I was realizing that I was doing the same, I worked with a similar type of woman, just like in the similar places, oftentimes like PCOS, thyroid issues, just general like adrenal burnout, and just struggling with like a multitude of hormonal imbalances. Practice that's like so beyond burnt out. They have all these mystery issues, digestive symptoms, and they're just chasing so many different diagnoses and labs. And so I was attracting like the hardest cases. And my training was at first like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Like they've tried everything with all these people, like they've done keto and low carb and all these things. And so I really had to take it back to the foundations, because honestly, a lot of times the foundations were missing. And you probably see this with your clients as well, is like, they're just not eating enough, or they're just not practicing balance with their macros, or they're just not sleeping or prioritizing sleep, or they're just doing too much. There's just too much on their plate. And so at the same time, I was like burning myself out with one-on-one. So I said, you know what, I'm going to put this into a educational course. I'm going to put like all my secrets into this this course that had videos and PDFs, recipe books, and take a step back from my practice for a little while and allow women to go through this course on their own, and then have this great community where they could be leaning on each other. And it ended up for me, it was just a way for me to kind of like beat the burnout for a little while and take a break. And then Fully Nourished just ended up like exploding. And there were things that women were like almost healing themselves of that I didn't even expect, just incredible transformations on their own. And so Fully Nourished has really turned into this like course that's bigger than I could have ever imagined. And that's kind of that's the kind of like self-paced DIY version of my work that I do. And I require it for people that are going to want to work one-on-one with me. As of now, I'm not offering one-on-one coaching, but that will change pretty soon in the future. It's just been like me trying to figure out like how I want to structure it, just because there's such demand. But Fully Nourished is the way that people can really get started. And I feel like it's great for the woman that's like burnt out and just needs to really restore things before she moves on to the next level, or like starting to focus on like, okay, I'm going to start like strength training and doing all this stuff, these kind of extra things. It's more for the girl that's like super burnout or has just got a diagnosis or has been struggling with the diagnosis for a while and nothing's been working.
I think what I love is that there's so much, there's becoming so much out there now. Like we actually sat on a panel podcast the other day with Kitty, and all of us women on the panel, we all actually teach the same foundational nutrition principles, I believe. And because what's really important is that you resonate with your coach.
Yes,
because and you have a connection, and you feel like they hold space for you. And so sometimes it's just going to be a personality thing, right? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, you're younger than me. You might just resonate with women who are younger, whereas I'm, 40, so I'm getting more women in their 40s who have had babies and want to recover from that. And,
right.
So different people. I just love that there's so much out there to help people now. And, your program looks so amazing. And you really hang out a lot on YouTube, right?
Yeah. My YouTube channel is pretty consistent now. I've been working on it. Hang out a lot on Instagram and on YouTube.
Yeah, cool. So what's your handle for everyone?
For both, it's just Jessica Ash Wellness.
Yeah, awesome. Oh, Jess, you're so amazing. I'm so grateful to have you on the show. I really hope that everyone listening who has been diagnosed, I'm not going to say has, I'm going to say has been diagnosed with PCOS endometriosis. I hope this has given you a bit of insight, and I would love it if you listen to this episode and you would tag Jess and me and just let us know what you learnt from it, and head over to Jess's channel and check out her Fully Nourished course. Thanks so much, Jess.
Thank you so much for having me, Layla.
I'm Layla Lutz, and you've been listening to The Body Never Lies. If you haven't yet, please go to your favourite podcast app and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. All the resources and references from this episode are waiting for you on my website, leelalutz.com. Just click on podcast and look for this episode. Now join me next week for another episode of The Body Never Lies. Thank you so much for listening.